An exciting chapter in human history began on the European continent when a new people, Homo sapiens, set foot on these lands from Western Asia. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Mandrin Cave in France suggests that this migration may have begun around 56,800 years ago. Of course, these were not the first hominins to migrate out of Africa, but they were the first modern humans to enter this region. This was a land that had previously been inhabited by another human species. These newcomers are generally known as Cro-Magnons. This name comes from a rock shelter in France called Abri de Cro-Magnon, where a French paleontologist named Louis Lartet first discovered their bones in 1868. When the Cro-Magnons stepped onto the cold, vast, mammoth steppes of the Ice Age, they encountered the Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis. Neanderthals had been living in Eurasia for more than 100,000 years and were well adapted to the deadly cold of that era. Their short, muscular stature and broad chests equipped them with a kind of biological mechanism for retaining heat. Their large noses helped warm and humidify the cold, dry air they breathed, and thanks to their powerful physiques, they could survive the freezing winters of the Ice Age, wearing only a single layer of animal hide. However, around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals disappeared, and the Cro-Magnons became the only human species in Europe. This event raised many questions in the minds of scientists about what exactly transpired between these two human groups. The bones and tools they left behind, like pieces of a puzzle, help us reconstruct the world in which both species lived and allow us to understand what caused one human lineage to survive while the other vanished forever. This video is not only the story of the first modern humans in Europe, but also the story of the final days of their powerful relatives, the Neanderthals. When we look at Cro-Magnon skeletons, there is almost no difference from our own. They were generally tall and muscular. Males stood at about 1.75 meters in height, and their brain volumes were even slightly larger than the average modern human brain. Of course, compared to present-day Europeans, they had more pronounced brow ridges and broader faces, but they were the first humans to possess a clearly defined chin, one of the distinguishing features of modern humans. Genetic analyses show that these early humans had darker skin because the natural selective pressure toward lighter skin in Europe had not yet begun. These pioneer groups were in fact descendants of Homo sapiens populations that had lived for some time in various regions of Western Asia after leaving Africa. From those fertile lands, covering parts of present-day Turkey and Iraq, some populations gradually moved northwest toward Europe. It appears that the first wave of these migrations left no genetic impact on later European populations. However, a subsequent wave around 37,000 years ago gave rise to a population that later formed the basis of the Cro-Magnons and ultimately of modern Europeans. From the moment they entered Europe, the Cro-Magnons left behind a strange and remarkable cultural and technological legacy. Their arrival marked the beginning of a period known as the Upper Paleolithic, a time filled with innovation, invention, and creativity. The discovery of their skeletons in 1868 was a historic event, as it challenged the creationist beliefs of the time and provided powerful evidence for human evolution. Contrary to what one might assume, these people were not primitive or naive. On the contrary, they possessed a strong artistic and symbolic sensibility. They left behind astonishing works, especially the paintings found inside caves and rock shelters that continue to captivate us today. One of the most astonishing examples is the artwork of the Chauvet Cave in southern France.
The walls of this cave, with a history dating back around 36,000 years, are covered with more than 100 animal depictions, ranging from mammoths to lions, from horses to cave bears. Using red ochre pigment and black charcoal, they painted these animals with such strange and realistic detail that you almost feel as if they are moving. This artistic sensibility was not limited to painting alone. They also created small sculptures of women, known as Venus figurines. These figurines typically feature exaggerated breasts, bellies, and hips, and have been found all across Europe. Some believe these sculptures represent fertility symbols or a mother goddess. However, there are also theories suggesting that they may have been good luck charms, or even a kind of self-portrait made by female artists. One of the factors behind the success of the Cro-Magnons was likely their skill in tool making. Their tools, known as the Aurignacian culture, represented a major leap forward compared to Neanderthal tools. They knew how to produce long, sharp blades from stone cores and then use these to make spears, carving knives, or scraping tools for skinning animal hides. But perhaps their most revolutionary invention was the bone needle. This simple tool allowed them to sew multi-layered, well-fitted clothing from animal skins. These garments were not only warmer and more comfortable, but also helped them survive in Europe's cold climate and live more easily in diverse and challenging environments. Thus, the stage was set for one of the most important periods in prehistory, a time when an intelligent and adaptable human species entered a continent previously occupied by another human species. Their relationship between these two groups was highly complex. Genetic evidence shows that, contrary to popular belief, their encounters were not always hostile. In fact, interbreeding did occur between them, most likely shortly after modern humans left Africa, and again in Western Asia. This is why most present-day non-African populations carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genes. However, there was probably no single cause behind the disappearance of the Neanderthals, but rather a combination of several different factors. The arrival of the larger Cro-Magnon population led to intense competition for food and resources. On the other hand, diseases brought by modern humans, against which Neanderthals had no immunity, may have dealt them a devastating blow. As a result, Neanderthals, who were likely already living in small and isolated groups, were either absorbed by Cro-Magnons or fell behind in the competition and went extinct. This event permanently changed the course of human history. Genetic traces reveal a fascinating story of interaction and coexistence between different human species, proving that our ancestors shared their world closely and intimately with other humans. As Homo sapiens passed through the Middle East, they encountered Neanderthals even before reaching Europe and interbred with them in regions now known as Iran and Saudi Arabia. Farther east, in the highlands of Central Asia, they encountered another human group known as Denisovans. The traces of these ancient encounters are still alive in our DNA. Most present-day non-African populations carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, which is essentially a legacy of those ancient meetings. Similarly, Denisovan genetic traces are found most prominently in present-day Melanesian and Australian indigenous populations, who may carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Those other human species were the undisputed masters of their own regions. Denisovans were adapted to the harsh conditions and high altitudes of Asia, and Neanderthals were unrivaled specialists in surviving the cold. When Cro-Magnons finally entered Europe, they stepped onto land that had long been Neanderthal territory. From the Iberian Peninsula to the cold, frozen plains of what is now Ukraine, and all the way to the British Isles, cave-dwelling tribes were already settled across the landscape. Imagining
No one can
the
be
first
certain how our
encounters between
ancestors
these two
perceived the
species
Neanderthals.
is both fantastic
Did they see them
and
as different
captivating.
beings, as rivals, or as relatives? However, genetic evidence shows that alongside conflict, coexistence, and even reproduction were also part of this story. Nevertheless, their relationship likely became more complex and competitive over time. There is no definitive fossil evidence proving an interspecies war, such as a human skeleton pierced by a spear from another species, but the environment itself was harsh and competitive enough. If you've enjoyed the video up to this point, be sure to like it and subscribe to the Tek Science channel. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section. What do you think about Cro-Magnon humans, our ancestors, and the Neanderthals? What do you believe caused their extinction? Also, if you wish, you can support us financially via the link in the video description. The steppes were a ruthless land, vast, cold, dry, swept by harsh winds and filled with dangerous predators such as cave lions and hyenas. Both human groups were likely competing for the best caves and for hunting herds of bison, reindeer, and mammoths. In such a risky struggle for survival, even a small advantage could mean the difference between survival and extinction. And it was in this arena of competition that the Cro-Magnons gained the upper hand. Their toolkits were far more diverse and advanced. They had invented technologies such as the atlatl, or spear thrower, a device that allowed them to hurl their spears from a safer distance with greater force and accuracy. Their skill in making bone needles also enabled them to sew fitted, multi-layered clothing that provided exceptional protection against Europe's brutal cold. When combined with broader social networks and perhaps more complex symbolic communication and language, these technical innovations likely gave Homo sapiens a major advantage in exploiting resources and adapting to environmental change. The archaeological record shows us a clear pattern. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals vanished from Europe. Denisovans endured longer, but they too disappeared from Asia between 30,000 and 20,000 years ago. The timing of their decline almost exactly coincides with the spread of modern humans into those regions. It appears that our ancestors' direct entry into these lands marked the beginning of the end for their ancient relatives. This replacement was likely not a rapid and violent conquest, but a gradual process, a slow extinction unfolding over thousands of years. The newcomers, equipped with better technology and perhaps faster population growth, made more efficient use of limited resources and step by step marginalized Neanderthals and Denisovans, eventually pushing them off the stage entirely. Although the possibility of direct conflict exists and is supported by scientists such as Kwang-Yang Ko, this is not the dominant theory. Human history is full of violence, and discoveries at sites like Jebel Sahaba in Sudan show that even organized warfare between different Homo sapiens groups existed around 13,000 years ago. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that similar conflicts may have occurred between different human species as well. Nevertheless, it is more likely that Cro-Magnons caused the extinction of Neanderthals without deliberately setting out to kill them. By being slightly more successful hunters, sewing warmer clothing, and raising more children to adulthood, they gradually won a long war of attrition and ultimately became the only humans left on the vast stage of Eurasia. The fundamental difference between these two species lay in the sophistication of their tools and their hunting methods. Neanderthals made effective use of Mousterian tools, carefully prepared flakes produced in advance. But Cro-Magnon technology represented a far greater leap forward. Our ancestors were producing long, standardized stone blades, crafting spear points from bone and antler, and wielding projectile weapons such as the atlatl, or spear thrower. These innovations allowed them to hunt from safer distances with greater force and accuracy. Such advanced tools helped them exploit the resources of the mammoth steppes more efficiently than the Neanderthals, and this competition gradually caused Neanderthals to fall behind in securing their traditional food sources. Dietary flexibility was another major survival advantage for our ancestors. Evidence suggests that Neanderthals were often apex predators, focusing heavily on hunting large animals such as mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. In contrast, Homo sapiens had a far more varied diet. In addition to hunting large game, they pursued smaller and faster prey like rabbits and birds, and even made use of aquatic resources such as fish and shellfish. Although scientists still disagree on exactly when wolves were fully domesticated, evidence indicates that early relationships between humans and dogs may have enhanced their ability to hunt a wider range of animals, an especially important advantage as climates shifted and large animal populations began to decline. Another factor, although indirect, likely played a powerful role in the disappearance of the Neanderthals: genetic admixture. When these two populations interacted, particularly in limited regions of southern Europe, successful interbreeding occurred. Genetic studies show that while Neanderthal DNA flowed into the larger Homo sapiens population, there is almost no evidence of gene flow in the opposite direction. This means that the smaller Neanderthal population was effectively absorbed and diluted within the modern human population. Over generations, the number of individuals carrying exclusively Neanderthal genes declined, and eventually they disappeared as an independent species. Their shrinking of their population also created a dangerous internal threat, what scientists call a genetic bottleneck. When the number of individuals available for mating decreases, inbreeding increases. Studies of Neanderthal remains, such as the Altai Neanderthal from Siberia, reveal extremely low genetic diversity. This led to genetic weaknesses caused by inbreeding, in which harmful mutations accumulate and can result in birth defects, physical frailty, and reduced fertility. Such genetic vulnerability made their populations more susceptible to external pressures, and perhaps one of those pressures was an invisible enemy that arrived with the newcomers: disease. Homo sapiens migrating out of Africa brought with them a host of tropical and temperate viruses and pathogens, to which Neanderthals, after thousands of years in the cold climates of Eurasia, had no immunity. This microbial onslaught likely triggered deadly outbreaks among Neanderthal populations, much like what occurred thousands of years later when Europeans arrived in the Americas. Research suggests that viruses such as genital herpes and pathogens associated with stomach ulcers were transmitted from modern humans to Neanderthals. Of course, our ancestors also acquired some genes from Neanderthals that strengthened their immune systems against Eurasian diseases. But overall, modern humans emerged from this exchange far stronger, while Neanderthals suffered far greater losses. In the end, nature and the Earth itself delivered several fatal blows. Around 40,000 years ago, the global climate entered a period of severe instability known as Heinrich Event 4. During this time, temperatures fluctuated rapidly and violently between extreme cold and relative warmth. Ecosystems were thrown into chaos, and the migration routes of the large animals on which Neanderthals depended were disrupted. However, modern humans were able to overcome these changes thanks to better clothing and more adaptable hunting strategies. Around 40,000 years ago, a major natural disaster occurred: the Campanian ignimbrite volcanic eruption near present-day Naples. This massive eruption blanketed large parts of southern and eastern Europe under thick layers of ash and likely triggered a volcanic winter. This event probably wiped out the already fragile Neanderthal groups that remained in those regions. In the end, the extinction of the Neanderthals was not a sudden event, but the chain reaction of multiple interconnected pressures. The arrival of the Cro-Magnons acted as a catalyst, introducing competition, disease, and genetic admixture into the equation. A species already burdened by climate change and a lack of genetic diversity could no longer endure. Although Neanderthals vanished as an independent species, their story did not end completely. Fragments of their genetic legacy still live on in billions of modern humans today, a silent reminder of ancient people who once breathed in the same world we inhabit. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a like, and if you're not yet subscribed to the Tek Science channel on YouTube, follow us to spend your free time with us and enjoy more content.